بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد. My dear brothers and sisters, Jazakumullah khair for having me today. And today's talk is going to be quite a practical talk, so I'll be moving around a lot. If you do have pens and paper, the second session at least will be very beneficial because we'll be doing a practical exercise. And I want you all to try and take part practically by writing down yourselves some personal details that remain with yourself, inshallah. So our topic today is living without interest. And alhamdulillah, our Imam is very happy during Maghrib Salah recited the ayat of Riba, so I don't need to repeat them here. But essentially, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these verses commands the believers to stay away from Riba. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about it as following the footsteps of shaitan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about it in other ayat about going to war with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. Is the only act mentioned in the Quran explicitly for which the punishment is on the Day of Judgment. The person will rise out of their grave as though shaitan is playing with them, or he is deranged by the whisperings of shaitan. And Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, he said that on the Day of Judgment, the person who deals with riba will be given a shield and a sword and be told, prepare yourself for you're going for war with Allah and His Messenger. And it is one of the most severest sins in Islam. It's considered as one of the either the 7 or the 9 major sins of Islam, and is one of the key aspects that the Prophet ﷺ came down to prohibit. In fact, in history, Nabi Salih alayhi salam was actually sent to his people of Thamud specifically to deal with their dealings in interest. And so in history, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent prophets specifically for nations, not for any other sin, specifically to deal, to tell them and to keep them away from dealing in interest. And so it is a very serious thing. And every Muslim should take it seriously. It is not something light. It is not something you can wash away by giving some sadaqah. It is not something you can remove by praying salah. It is considered one of the major sins, like committing zina, like drinking alcohol, or eating pork, or lying, or murder, and so on. It is considered as one of the major sins. In fact, some scholars said it is equal to the other sins and 1 degree below shirk. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He will forgive all sins except shirk. And even if a person becomes Muslim and they stop their shirk and they make tawbah for it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can forgive them for that. But first of all, before we get into the subject, I want to really reinforce that this is something we should pay attention to. And I deal with many people in the community, men and women, younger and older, and this is an issue that everybody is involved in. As soon as you turn, even before you turn 16, when your parents are giving you money, when you are buying and selling things yourself, small things like a phone or a bike or something like that that you're selling to a friend or someone else, you are beginning to trade with one another. And out of all of the aspects of Islam that we teach our young people, the one thing that is very rarely ever taught is the principles of Islamic trade. And this is not reserved for people who work on Wall Street, it's not for people who work in the city in London, this is for everybody. Each and every single one of us has to know the principles and the manners of trade in Islam, and what makes our trade halal and what makes it haram. Many people think, I don't work at the pub, I'm not a bouncer outside a nightclub, this and that, I don't have a house on mortgage, I'm okay. But when they sell their car, you know, the famous old thing, it's sold as seen, and there's all sorts of faults you don't tell the buyer. And this is one of the major harams and things that makes a contract haram, that you are dealing with gharar, that you are selling things that is ambiguous. So you're selling something, you've not informed the buyer of the ailments already within the product, and you are selling it on to this person. So the money you're taking for a halal product is now haram. And likewise with interest, there are many aspects to it that are haram. And there are many things that we need to be careful of, even in our normal dealings, even in our normal buying and selling, that we need to take into account. But this talk today, the first part, inshallah, I'll be going over some background, some important history that we need to know about, because it sets up principles that I'll be working with. And the second session as well, we'll be doing more the practical side, in arranging our finances, in ensuring that we're set up in a healthy financial situation so that we can avoid having to borrow or use riba. And also highlighting to you the most common methods through which people buy and sell with riba, and they consider it not to be an issue. Or they don't think about it, but they are dealing in riba, and therefore they have to be careful about that. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those who give out of their own possessions by night and by day, in private and in public, will have their reward with their Lord, no fear for them, nor will they grieve. But those who take usury will rise up on the day of resurrection like someone tormented by Satan's touch. That is because they say, trade and usury are the same. But God has allowed trade and forbidden usury. Whoever, on receiving God's warning, stops taking usury, may keep his past gains. Allah will be his judge. But whoever goes back to usury will be an inhabitant of the fire, there to remain. God blights usury, but blesses charitable deeds, with multiple increase. He does not love the ungrateful sinner. And some background on these verses. First of all, riba originated among the people of Jahiliyyah. Now, riba is obviously the Arabic term, and not the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, that I'm a member of. People always like to joke about that. And people in Jahiliyyah, i.e. before the coming of the message to Muhammad ﷺ, they used to deal in this. And they would say to the borrower, give us 100 that is due now, or increase it to 150 and pay later. And this is known in Arabic as riba and nasi'a. So when you're categorizing riba, this is known as riba and nasi'a. And we have it very commonly today. Your bank will tell you you can borrow £10,000 on an 8% APR. And usually now they'll fix the term because the FSCA has required them to, but previously sometimes they wouldn't. And you would be owing this person, depending on how much you've got left of your borrowing, 8% each year. So it could take you 1 year, could take you 2 years, could take you a month. So you don't know how much you're going to pay back. And every time, because you're unable to pay back, the person is adding a sum. And therefore is the worst part of usury that you should know is that it's abusing the poor person. It's abusing the person who needs to borrow. And so you're taking advantage of a situation and leveling more debt upon them than he's able to bear. And that's why it's such a crime. Because you are taking advantage of this person's situation. You are increasing and increasing upon them. And then with some people, if they are unable to manage it or unable to get out of it, the debts can grow to be huge sums. Very recently, when you had the increase of payday loan companies, some of you might have read in the newspapers that one couple took out a loan for £80, and it grew with the company to £128,000 because it was on a 20,000% interest, and because they had agreed to it and they'd signed up, and every month they were paying back, but they were not paying back the original sum, they were paying back an admin fee on the original sum. And so the sum grew and grew and grew. Eventually, on that specific occasion, the judge actually threw out the case and said the loan is cancelled because it's illegal. But those types of loans still exist, and you'll see them very commonly on TV. And they are taking advantage of the poorest people in our community. People who need just £80, £100, £200 just to pay the gas, the electrics, get some food, and so on, is taking advantage of those types of people. And that is the worst part of interest, that it takes advantage of people who are not aware of their wealth, not fully aware of what they're getting into. And that is one of the key parts of the prohibition of interest. And when 150 became due, they would say, give us 150 now, or increase it to 200 and pay later, and so on and so forth. And actually, some of the uncles of the Prophet, Al-Abbas, was very famously known for dealing in interest, and he had many people that had owed him money, and a lot of the wealth he made was through this form of interest. Abu Jahl used to deal in interest, so did Abu Lahab. All of the wealthy people of Quraysh actually made their money through interest, as well as some other things I don't want to say in the masjid. But they would predominantly make a lot of their money through interest, because the Arabs used to predominantly make their wealth through livestock or harvest. And if you're a harvester, then you have to wait till a certain part of the year, harvest your crops, sell them, and then you have to survive the next 9 years, the next 9 months on what you've sold and harvested. And so it become a month or 2 months before the harvest was the poorest time of their life. And those of you who know the seerah know the Battle of Tabuk took part just a month before they were going to harvest the crops. And that's why some of the Sahaba decided to remain behind. That's why they forgave them after a time. And the Munafiqeen all remained behind. Because they said, why should we go to Tabuk and we'll miss our harvest and then we'll be poor for the next year. And actually if you miss your harvest and don't crop, it ruins the field and you have to wait 2 years to reuse that field. So it was a big sacrifice that Sahaba gave to actually go to the Battle of Tabuk. But in that society you had this 2-month period where you would have very, very little money. And so Al-Abbas and others used to make wealth by lending to the poor people then and making them pay extra in riba. And when the Prophet conquered Mecca, he informed them of the ayah of riba, and he said anyone who owes anything to Al-Abbas, it is finished, it is upon its head. And actually he wiped out a lot of money that was owed to Al-Abbas in that single situation, and many of the other people as well. So know that riba used to take place. It took place in time of the Prophet and is one of the earliest prohibitions to come into Islam. And Islam also forbade another type of riba known as riba al-fadl, which means adding to the amount when exchanging one item for another of the same type. So for example, if gold is sold for gold, it is not permissible except for like and hand to hand, and whoever gives more or asks for more has engaged in riba. And that's actually a hadith. That when you're exchanging gold for gold, so you have gold bangles, and you're exchanging them for a gold necklace, it must be the exact same weight in gold, because gold is sold by weight. And you cannot say my bangle is more beautiful than your necklace, and so I want more money for my bangle than your necklace. Okay? It must be like for like, and hand to hand. It must be done at the exact same time. And the reason for that is that the price of commodities changes rapidly. And so if you say to someone, well, give me the necklace now, and I'll give you the bangle tomorrow, money has what we call a time value. Over time, it is less valuable to you. If you have money now, it's more valuable. And if you get money in a year's time, it's less valuable, because you can't use it to profit right now. And so it has to be like for like and hand to hand. And whoever gives more, if you gave them a bangle and a ring, then that is haram. And if the person asks for more, says, no, give me your bangle and ring, then that is also haram. Okay, that's called riba al-fadl. That's one type of riba. And another example is if he sells a sa'a, which is known as 4 mud, a volume of wheat, for 2 sa'a, 8 mud, of the same commodity, even if it's hand to hand, he's engaged in riba. So in the time of Sahaba, many of them, they would exchange the same type of item. He would say, you've got barley and I've got wheat, let's exchange. You can exchange those. But if he says, I've got old wheat and you've got new wheat, then I want, give me 8 bags of that one for 4 bags of this one, that is considered haram. Is that okay? So when you're trading with the same commodity, it has to be like for like and hand to hand. Okay, at the same time, the same quantity or volume or number, depending on how the item is sold. Is that okay?
Excuse me, just a question, sorry to
Yeah.
That's before you talking about this gold bangle and everything.
Yeah.
I don't understand it, because if you go into the shop, that's gold have a value.
Yeah.
And then you wanted to buy something else,
Yeah.
the gold thing, is it haram then?
No. What you must do is, say for example, if you had a gold bangle that you want to sell,
Yeah.
so you sell it for a price.
Yeah.
So you take the money, and then you buy your necklace.
Yeah.
But it's haram to trade your gold bangle for a gold necklace when they're 2 different weights.
Yes.
So if your bangle weighs more than the necklace in gold, then you are not allowed to trade them directly.
Alright.
But if your bangle and the necklace are the same weight, then there's no problem.
Okay, that's fine.
Is that okay? Very important for sisters. Actually, some brothers might trade as well in gold. But if you are trading in gold or even silver, then remember that the best way to do it and the clearest way, because the Prophet prohibited al-bay'atani fil bay'ah, that you trade 2 things at the same time. So for example, I'm not allowed to say to you that I will sell you this gold bangle for that necklace and you give me £20 on top. That is 2 trades in one. Is that okay? You're not allowed to do that. So you must sell your gold bangle, take the money, and then buy the necklace with that money. Is that okay?
Yeah,
So that's the way it takes place. That's right. Jabir ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam cursed the one who consumes riba, and the one who pays it, and the one who writes it down, and the two who witness it, and he said they are all the same. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, he said that in terms of being cursed, they are all, because they all cooperated in the allowing the contract to take place. Now just to be elaborating on that. So anyone who is directly involved in the trade or in the contract, all of them are cursed because they all cooperated. For example, the contract cannot take place without the two witnesses. And so them being witnesses is also haram for them. The person, if they have a scribe who writes it down, he is also participating in writing the contract. Is that okay? Now, a lot of people freak out, but alhamdulillah, we're in a Hanafi masjid, so we can use the Hanafi fatwa. The Ahnaf have a very good principle, actually, that whenever you're dealing with something, how far are you participating in the deal? So, for example, say I'm an architect, and somebody asks me to design a building for them. Right? So I go and I design their building. Now they're going to use their building for something haram. Is it haram for me to design their building or not? Let me give you another example. Say I work in IT and I repair servers, and a bank asks me to repair their server. Is it haram for me to repair their server? What do you all think? So
I got two opinions.
Alhamdulillah, like Imam Ahmed, Bob Halal and Haram. Depends on, take your riwayah and check it. There you go ahead.
Yeah, the first I would say no, and then yes.
Okay.
If you're working for a bank and whose bank and your job is, for example, is to dealing with the loans and the interest, I would say that this is kind of in a very difficult situation. Just
Okay.
Like, and if you're working for some other companies which is not dealing with the interest, and you're earning a halal money, you're earning, it's all right.
So, for example, the person who repairs the server, is his job haram?
No.
His job is halal, isn't it? He repairs IT. There's nothing wrong with repairing servers. So the Ahnaf say, well, he's repairing a server. That's all he's doing. What they use the server for is their business. Is that okay? We're not going to make him liable for everything down the chain. The Hanbalis had a different approach. They said, no. If you're doing something that aids a system that is haram, then that is also haram. One man came to Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and he was a policeman. And this was at a time of persecution. And they were persecuting the Muslims. And so he asked Ahmad ibn Hanbal, am I of those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curses as partaking in corruption? Ahmad ibn Hanbal said, no, you are the corrupt person. Why? Because this cannot take place, and you are part of those who are upholding this. Okay, so the Hanbali madhab actually extrapolates your participation a lot further. So they would say this is haram. Whereas the Hanafis, alhamdulillah, they would say as long as the job you're doing is permissible, then that's fine. Okay? So we can take that position, where alhamdulillah, our Shaykh is here, so with his blessing, we'll use the Hanafi fatwa. And someone narrated the Prophet said, last night I had a dream with two men. That two men came to me and took me out to a sacred land. Then we set out until we came to a river of blood, in which a man was standing. And on the brink of the river there was another man, in front of whom were some rocks. The man who was in the river, came, and when he wanted to get out, the other man threw a rock in his mouth and sent him back to where he had been. Every time he wanted to get out, he threw a rock in his mouth and sent him back to where he had been. I said, what is this? And he said, the one who you saw in the river is the one who consumes riba. Okay? And as I said, consuming and participating in riba is all considered equal. And so this is the punishment. Some said this is the punishment in the grave. Others said this is the punishment in the hellfire for this person. So you can see it's a very severe punishment for the person. And this is perpetual for eternity. So he's in a river of blood. Every time he tries to get out, he has a rock thrown into his face. He heads back. And he's doing that perpetually. So this is very, very serious. And that's why, as we progress through the seminar, I want you to treat it as a problem. Imagine you have, if you have a heart problem, and you have to take control of your cholesterol, you have to take control of what you're eating, your diet, everything else. How are you going to change your behavior? I want you to change your behavior in the same way, but with your money. They treat it like you've got a health problem, like you've got a cancer, or not a cancer, but you've got a heart illness, and you know what you can do to get out of it, and you have to do that to get out of it. I'll miss over some of this because a lot of it will come later, and inshallah you'll get some notes later as well. Now, there's a very important hadith that I want to touch upon, and I'll explain this because it sets the basis for everything else. It's very common that you hear amongst Muslims today that you can't get away from riba and there's nothing you can do. So they have two ideas, and either you go live in the cave, find a place in the mountain and camp yourself out and live as a family and eat from the wildlife. Or the other is that, well, forget about it, you can't do anything, the system's bigger than me, and therefore leave it. Okay? And both these ideas essentially come from this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, narrated from Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, compiled in the Sunan of Abu Dawood. The Prophet ﷺ said, "A time is certainly coming to mankind when only the receiver of usury will remain, and if he does not receive it, some of its vapor will reach him." And then Ibn Isa, he said, "Some of its dust will reach him." I'm sure many of you have heard this hadith, that the time will come that even if you are not consuming riba, i.e. you're not being paid riba, the dust or the vapor of the riba will touch you. Now, I usually do an exercise at this point, and if I can find my wallet, here it is. Because many of us, we've heard some myths about money. And so I always do this exercise, and make it easy for everyone. Can anybody tell me what this is? That's a £5 note. Is that okay? If somebody tell me how valuable is a £5 note? How valuable is this? It's worth £5. Dave, anyone to go a little bit further? How valuable is what it's made from?
Not much.
Now it's plastic, recycled plastic, but anyway.
Couple of pence.
Maybe a few pennies at most for this. Dave, is this intrinsically valuable? No, a few pennies. Is its value in what it represents? So it's not valuable itself, but what it represents to another person is valuable. Is that okay? Dave. Now, just before I go into this, who can tell me where the value of this £5 comes from? Who tells me how much £5 is worth?
Market.
Set by the government.
The Treasury? So want to go a bit further?
Bank of England.
Bank of England? They want to go further?
I guess it depends on the rate of inflation.
Okay, affected by inflation?
It represents the amount of gold that's held by the Treasury for them to get that note out to be.
Where it said the Treasury holds an amount of gold that this £5 represents. Dave? So therefore, in theory, I can go to the bank and get an amount of gold for this 5,000. Anyone agree with that?
You won't get the gold though.
Who agrees that's the idea? Who thinks that's what happens? Put your hands up. Who thinks that's what happens? That this £5 is representing an amount of gold. They put your hand up if you agree with that. Okay. To explain this, I'll show you some history, a short bit of history about currency and its value. Okay. So, the first major change happened in 1873. And this is when Germany have established or moved onto what's known as the classic gold standard. The classic gold standard meant that every piece of paper, every piece of currency, like this £5, and that is a $20 note from 1873, was equal to a $20 worth piece of gold. Is that okay? So it was a piece of gold that was worth $20, and you had $20, so 100% ratio. Is that okay? $20, $20 of gold. Is that okay? Now this continued for some time, but during World War I, everyone knows when World War I was? Somebody tell me the date? World War I? 1914 to?
17.
To 1918. Exactly. During World War I, the US stopped redemption rights. So in the US, what I could do is I could take my $20 note and I could go to the bank and say, I want my $20 of gold. And they would have to give me the $20 of gold. Is that okay? Every bank had to do it. Every dollar that was out there had to be redeemable in gold. When World War I started, they stopped that right to redeem your gold. Because there's a war going on, they need the gold, they're trading internationally. In 1914 to 1945, currency was partially represented by gold. So before it was $20 to $20 of gold. Now the US Federal Reserve, in an act in 1913, they said $50 will now represent $20 worth of gold. So you had a 40% ratio that had gone down to. Okay? There's a little bit of history in here, and you should know that the history of our current currency is very much tied to World War I and World War II. These are world-changing events, not just for politically, but also financially. In 1914 to 1916, Britain financed what was known as the Allies, France and so on, and they spent a total of $47 billion in that process in World War I, in US dollars at that time. So US, who was not participating in the war until very late, they actually sold the Allies all produce and so on. All of the British factories actually started, instead of producing cars and food, they started producing machine guns and tanks and so on, because of the factories. So they flipped overnight. The entire UK industrial system was producing for war. So they stopped producing their own food and produce. So they had to buy that from the US. Now in that time, when you buy internationally, they will send you the goods, you send them the gold. Okay, because currency is backed by gold. So all of the allies had to sell the US, or send to the US their gold in exchange for goods. Okay, so the people had food and wheat and so on. So, in December of 1941, when you went into the Second World War, and you had Pearl Harbor that took place, and you remember that, December of 1941, this is when the US troops now began to engage on the ground in Germany and places surrounding Germany in World War II. Even those who are Marvel fans, the Captain America series builds on that World War II and Hitler and the rise of Hitler and so on. So now, when this happened, US national incomes rose from 46 billion in 1933 to 142 billion in 1943. So in 10 years, household incomes in US rose by nearly $96 billion. That's because they profited by selling to the Allies, Europe and so on, produce and things like that, and getting gold from them. In July of 1944, the US had 2/3 of the world's gold. All of the gold in the world, the US had 2/3 of it. Because largely through World War I and World War II, right up until the end, the US didn't really engage, but they were large produce makers. So they were selling all this produce all the way through, selling them weapons and so on and so forth, and taking all of the gold. Is that okay? In 1959 to 1971, when the US started to have its wars with Vietnam and so on, the US lost 50% of its gold because it now had to send gold to Europe and so on, whilst its own factories were producing machine guns and tanks, for Europe to now send it produce. And so it lost 50% of its gold. And also, very smartly, in 1960, the French President Charles de Gaulle, he realized that the US didn't have enough gold to back up the dollars it was sending them, because what the US very smartly did was, instead of sending gold, they said, we'll send you dollars. So they sent paper money and said, you can redeem this from us at any time. So they kept sending them paper, and they were taking the machine guns and food and everything else. And actually, through deceit, the US financed this entire war in Vietnam for free. Just sent paper, and they took all the goods. And so Charles de Gaulle in 1960 realized this what was happening, and so he demanded that the US send the gold that it had that backed up its dollars. So he said, here are your dollars back, your paper, give us the gold. And all the other countries of the world started to do this, and the US almost lost all of its gold reserves. So in 1971 of August, President Nixon, who you all know from the famous Frost-Nixon debates, those who remember those or who have seen them, removes the US dollar standard. So he decided, if we keep this standard, we will send all of our gold, and actually the entire financial market will collapse. And so, one thing I didn't mention was, in 1959, they moved off the gold standard to what was known as the Bretton Woods standard. So after the war, because the other nations of the world did not have enough gold to back up their currency, in Bretton Woods, which is an area, they had a conference there, they said what we'll do is all the foreign currencies, pretty much all of the world's currencies, will be represented by US dollars. So instead of backing up against gold, we will back up against US dollars, which are backed up against gold, so one step removed. Is that okay? So that's what all currencies from 1959 to 71 were all backed up not in gold, but in US dollars, that were then backed up in gold. Is that okay? Now when in the 60s and through to 71, when everyone realized the US is cheating us and is giving us paper and taking our goods, the US then lost 50% of all its gold. Okay? So President Nixon decided in August 71 that we will stop sending gold and we'll have a new forum in which we'll decide what the international monetary system will look like. But they took themselves off the gold standard. So from 1971 until today, no paper is represented by gold. No currency in the world backs up its currency in gold. None. Absolutely none. So all of the world's currencies are what we call a fiat currency. To put it very simply, this £5 is worth what me and you believe this £5 is worth. Understand that? This £5 is worth what me and you and everyone else believes this £5 is worth. Therefore, the currency can fluctuate. It can go up, it can go down, depending not upon any commodity that is backed by, because it's not backed by anything, but depending upon the confidence we have in that currency. Is that okay? The US is trillions and trillions of dollars in debt, but nobody cares, because they're confident the US will make money. When the confidence changes, the currency will plummet. Okay? And what it's represented, what they use is GDP and things like that, to show the value of the country and how much they're producing and so on, to give you confidence in its currency. So this paper is worth absolutely nothing. It doesn't represent any physical commodity. It doesn't represent gold, it doesn't represent oil, it doesn't represent machine guns, it doesn't represent tanks. This represents absolutely nothing. There's no physical thing backing this piece of paper.
At the same time when we have a war in Iraq and Kuwait, their currency was really gone.
But everyone's currency, yeah, because you're attacking the nation, they're going to be destroyed. So why would you invest that? So the currency is worth nothing, because there's no confidence.
It's all about confidence, isn't it? I can take that £5, I can go to the shop, I can get bread, milk, eggs for £5.
Good.
Ultimately, that's what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah, it represents what you can buy
What
with
you
it.
can buy with it.
Yeah.
And that's the confidence that we have in it.
Good.
If you had no, if we couldn't, and inflation was 2,000%,
Yeah.
and the bread was £10, obviously we couldn't buy it for £5.
No. Good.
That's what
So it's
about.
confidence. It's purely confidence that backs it. There's no physical commodity that backs any currency anywhere in the world. Is that okay? There you go. Now we've got to that point. It's very important just to basically see that in 1880 to 1914, you had the classic gold standard. Every piece of paper was represented by gold. By 1914 to 44, you had the gold exchange standard, where currency represented a portion of that gold coin. Then you had Bretton Woods. All currency is represented by US dollars, which is represented by gold. In 1971 until now, you have a fiat currency. No currency in the world is represented by any physical commodity. It's all confidence. Okay? Everyone's happy with that? We're not happy, but you understand that. Dave, is that clear? Okay. Now you have to understand what is currency. So, this piece of paper, what makes it £5? What gives me confidence in that £5? Okay, and for this part, we have a very nice little video by a very famous investor called Ray Dalio, so you might know about him. He has a very large hedge fund, and he put this video together, and I thought it was very good for representing what credit and currency is. Is that okay? So I'm just going to play it.
A market consists of all the buyers and all the sellers making transactions for the same thing. For example, there is a wheat market, a car market, a stock market, and markets for millions of things. An economy consists of all of the transactions in all of its markets. If you add up the total spending and the total quantity sold in all of the markets, you have everything you need to know to understand the economy. It's just that simple. People, businesses, banks, and governments all engage in transactions the way I just described, exchanging money and credit for goods, services, and financial assets. The biggest buyer and seller is the government, which consists of two important parts: a central government that collects taxes and spends money, and a central bank, which is different from other buyers and sellers because it controls the amount of money and credit in the economy.
For us, that's
It does this by influencing interest rates and printing new money. For these reasons, as we'll see, the central bank is an important player in the flow of credit. I want you to pay attention to credit. Credit is the most important part of the economy and probably the least understood. It's the most important part because it's the biggest and most volatile part. Just like buyers and sellers go to the market to make transactions, so do lenders and borrowers. Lenders usually want to make their money into more money, and borrowers usually want to buy something they can't afford, like a house or a car, or they want to invest in something like starting a business. Credit can help both lenders and borrowers get what they want. Borrowers promise to repay the amount they borrow, called principal, plus an additional amount, called interest. When interest rates are high, there is less borrowing because it's expensive. When interest rates are low, borrowing increases because it's cheaper. When borrowers promise to repay and lenders believe them, credit is created. Any two people can agree to create credit out of thin air. That seems simple enough, but credit is tricky because it has different names. As soon as credit is created, it immediately turns into debt. Debt is both an asset to the lender and a liability to the borrower. In the future, when the borrower repays the loan plus interest, the asset and the liability disappear and the transaction is settled. So why is credit so important? Because when a borrower receives credit, he is able to increase his spending. And remember, spending drives the economy. This is because one person's spending is another person's income. Think about it. Every dollar you spend, someone else earns, and every dollar you earn, someone else has spent. So when you spend more, someone else earns more. When someone's income rises, it makes lenders more willing to lend him money because now he's more worthy of credit. A credit-worthy borrower has two things: the ability to repay and collateral. Having a lot of income in relation to his debt gives him the ability to repay. In the event that he can't repay, he has valuable assets to use as collateral that can be sold. This makes lenders feel comfortable lending him money. So increased income allows increased borrowing, which allows increased spending. And since one person's spending is another person's income, this leads to more increased borrowing, and so on. This self-reinforcing pattern leads to economic growth and is why we have cycles. In a transaction, you have to give something in order to get something. And how much you get depends on how much you produce. Over time, we learn, and that accumulated knowledge raises our living standards. We call this productivity growth. Those who are inventive and hardworking raise their productivity and their living standards faster than those who are complacent and lazy. But that isn't necessarily true over the short run. Productivity matters most in the long run, but credit matters most in the short run. This is because productivity growth doesn't fluctuate much, so it's not a big driver of economic swings. Debt is, because it allows us to consume more than we produce when we acquire it, and it forces us to consume less than we produce when we have to pay it back. Debt swings occur in two big cycles. One takes about 5 to 8 years, and the other takes about 75 to 100 years. While most people feel the swings, they typically don't see them as cycles because they see them too up close, day by day, week by week. In this chapter, we're going to step back and look at these three big forces and how they interact to make up our experiences. As mentioned, swings around the line are not due to how much innovation or hard work there is. They're primarily due to how much credit there is. Let's for a second imagine an economy without credit. In this economy, the only way I can increase my spending is to increase my income, which requires me to be more productive and do more work. Increased productivity is the only way for growth. Since my spending is another person's income, the economy grows every time I or anyone else is more productive. If we follow the transactions and play this out, we see a progression like the productivity growth line. But because we borrow, we have cycles. This isn't due to any laws or regulations, it's due to human nature and the way that credit works. Think of borrowing as simply a way of pulling spending forward. In order to buy something you can't afford, you need to spend more than you make. To do this, you essentially need to borrow from your future self. In doing so, you create a time in the future that you need to spend less than you make in order to pay it back. It very quickly resembles a cycle. Basically, anytime you borrow, you create a cycle. This is as true for an individual as it is for the economy. This is why understanding credit is so important, because it sets into motion a mechanical, predictable series of events that will happen in the future. This makes credit different from money. Money is what you settle transactions with. When you buy a beer from a bartender with cash, the transaction is settled immediately. But when you buy a beer with credit, it's like starting a bar tab. You're saying you promise to pay in the future. Together, you and the bartender create an asset and a liability. You just created credit out of thin air. It's not until you pay the bar tab later that the asset and the liability disappear, the debt goes away, and the transaction is settled. The reality is that most of what people call money is actually credit. The total amount of credit in the United States is about $50 trillion, and the total amount of money is only about $3 trillion. Remember, in an economy without credit, the only way to increase your spending is to produce more. But in an economy with credit, you can also increase your spending by borrowing. As a result, an economy with credit has more spending and allows incomes to rise faster than productivity over the short run, but not over the long run. Now, don't get me wrong. Credit isn't necessarily something bad that just causes cycles. It's bad when it finances overconsumption that can't be paid back. However, it's good when it efficiently allocates resources and produces income so you can pay back the debt. For example, if you borrow money to buy a big TV, it doesn't generate income for you to pay back the debt. But if you borrow money to, say, buy a tractor, and that tractor lets you harvest more crops and earn more money, then you can pay back your debt and improve your living standards.
Dave, and just to clarify, the second type of credit that you mentioned there is something the Prophet ﷺ allowed specifically for farmers and those people. People who needed to borrow money now, and for example they had date orchards and things like that. They would come and value how much dates would be grown on this tree, and they would be allowed to borrow against that, because they didn't have money to spend on their family, and this is a form of transaction that was specifically allowed for them. So it's a type of trade that's permissible in Islam. So not all credit in Islam is impermissible. Is that okay? So we're not talking about credit, we're talking about interest. But the important part of that video is you can see that this £5 here, it doesn't just represent what the government prints as money. It also represents what the banks give as credit. Now the important part of that is that a bank is allowed to give us credit 9.8% of anything that you deposit with it. So if I deposit £10 with a bank, they will reserve for me just 9.8% of that. So they'll say 98p of your deposit is safe, and the other amount we can give out. Is that okay? So they're allowed to give out 9.8% of whatever you deposit. So if I put in £10, they can lend to another person £11.80. Is that okay? Or £11.20, and so on and so forth. So every time somebody borrows more money and they deposited more money, the bank is allowed to give out more money. and that's uncontrolled, or very minimal controls upon how much credit banks can give out. So that's why in the US, the actual money from the government is 3 trillion, and the money by banks and so on is 50 trillion. Okay, it's far more of our cash is with credit than it is with government printed. Is that okay? So, now, the reason why I wanted to share that is primarily because many Muslims get very caught up by this, and they say, well, if money is all to do with interest, and it's all coming from banks that are lending with credit based on interest, then I can't have any money and so on. Is that okay? So, one thing you know, there's a principle in Islam called umum al-balwa. This is to do if something becomes so prevalent and so vast that an individual cannot operate their daily life without it, then it becomes acceptable. It becomes a default. Is that okay? So for example, each of us need money to live our life, to buy food, to buy groceries and so on, to look after ourselves, to educate our children, to get to work, to earn money and so on, to pay for things that we need. And therefore it becomes acceptable. So having money is not haram. Is that okay? It's part of what we call umum al-balwa, that this is a form of interest. This is what the Prophet said, you'll be affected by the dust of interest. So this is the dust of interest, that we can't overcome this individually, even as a small community. So therefore we just accept it as it is. And therefore I am not sinful for having money. Is that okay? So I want everyone to know that from the start, that you are not sinful for simply having money, even though where it comes from involves interest and so on. And also when we talk about halal investments and so on, or mortgages and things like that, you have to remember that you can't charge the bank with the responsibility of changing the whole IMF and the financial market. They operate within an industry. And therefore, if part of their system is beyond their control, then we leave that beyond their control. But if I can remove it, then you're supposed to remove it. Okay? I'll give you a common example. In the RIBA's contracts, when we do contracts with commercial clients and even private clients, within the contract is a statutory right that if somebody delays payment, that you can put an 8% interest rate on. So okay, it's a statutory right, you're allowed that by law. We cross that out because it's haram. But it doesn't change the fact that by statutory law, even though I crossed out my contract, I am still entitled to it. Is that okay? But because I don't take up my entitlement, that's my prerogative. Is that okay? I am not liable just because it's there in the law. And similarly with the cash here, I'm not liable for this cash and what I do with it, just because somewhere down the line its value comes from credit and so on. Is that okay? So I want everyone to know that. Okay. The last bit I want to do before the break, we're going to have some breaks.
Second.
Yeah.
For example, that's coming to your point. If we're working in a firm, or we are on the job and we doing our job, but the company who is actually working with, he has a lot of, credit taken for.
We won't get into jobs because that's something different. What we're talking here is just money itself. So, okay, so being paid in currency is not haram. That's what I want to say. So even though the value of it is dictated by interest and other things, we are not liable for that. Is that okay? So just to break that cult myth. But I don't want to get into jobs and things because it gets very complex. And they're quite personal as well because each company is different. It's okay. We'll talk that in the break. So the first part, before we get into the second section, before the break, I just want to put this into everyone's mind is, why is it that we as individuals get into debt? Okay, so we spoke about the international level and the money and the currency level. Now we're going to move back to our personal level. Is that okay? So leave the government aside. We don't want to talk about Imran Khan or Sharaf or Nawaz or whoever. Leave them to their bit. We're talking about ourselves now. Is that okay? So I don't want to hear anything about the IMF. I don't want to hear anything about the US. I want to hear something about me and you, and that's it. Is that okay? Leave them aside because we are responsible for our own finances. Okay? And the Prophet here is speaking to us, he's speaking to us as individuals. And he ﷺ said, that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, that he sent Abu Ubaidah Amr bin al-Jarrah to Bahrain to collect the jizya tax. And the jizya tax, as you don't know, was a protection tax the Muslims used to take from non-Muslims who lived under their control for services to the army and things like that for their protection. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ had concluded a peace treaty with the people of Bahrain and appointed Al-Ala ibn al-Hadrami as their chief. And Abu Ubaidah arrived in Bahrain with the money. The Ansar heard of Abu Ubaidah's arrival, which coincided with the Fajr Salah led by the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam finished the prayer, they came to him. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam smiled when he saw them and said, I think you have heard of the arrival of Abu Ubaidah and that he has brought something, i.e. he has brought this jizya money that's now going to be distributed to the poor of Medina and Mecca and so on. So everyone's coming because they all want some of that money, and the people of Medina generally used to be very poor. So as a society, they weren't a very rich and wealthy society during the life of the Prophet ﷺ. They were generally quite poor, even until the Prophet ﷺ passed away. And just to highlight that, Aisha radhiyallahu anha said that we never once ate to our fill, we never filled our stomachs, except until after the Battle of Khaybar, which is about the 8th year of the Hijrah. For all that time, they never used to fill their stomachs with food, because they didn't have enough food. She was asked, what did you eat at? Sometimes she said, the 2 black things. We had water and dates. That's all they had for 3 months. For 3 months, never fire was not lit in their house. They never had meat for 3 months. We can't go for 3 hours without some meat, and they didn't eat for 3 months. So generally, as a society, they were very poor. So this money coming attracted everyone. They replied, yes, O Messenger of Allah. He said, have the good news and hope for what will please you. By Allah, I am not afraid that you will become poor, but I am afraid that the worldly wealth will be given to you in abundance, as it was given to those before you, and you will start competing each other for it as the previous nations competed for it, and then it will divert you as it diverted them. So what the Prophet was afraid of us for was not that we would be poor, but that we would become so rich that we become distracted. And so we should remember that our wealth is also a form of distraction. So when I'm talking about this, keep that part in mind. That the Prophet said that whoever denies himself a type of clothing out of humility for Allah, whilst he is able to wear it, Allah will summon him on the Day of Judgment amongst the whole of creation, in order to allow him to choose from any type of adornment of Iman which he wishes to adorn himself with. So this tells us that actually what we wear and so on is to do with our economic status. Don't look at somebody and say, mashallah, he's wearing certain branded clothes and I'm wearing this branded clothes. That is to do with his situation. Maybe he has more money than that and he's not spending it on those things. And maybe you have less and you're overspending. So never look at a person above and say, he's wearing all this and that and it's all haram and how can he possibly wear these branded clothes? No, it's not haram. Maybe they are doing something that is actually an act of zuhud. Maybe he will be this person who will be brought before Allah and told to wear any garment of Iman, because he could afford much, much more and he settled for much less. So never look at somebody else and see their clothing as a mark of their Iman or a piety or anything like that. Always focus on yourself. And you yourself, if you are able at some time, as Allah has blessed you, to buy something that's beautiful and expensive, and you choose not to do it out of humbleness, and you wear normal clothes like everyone else or something less than that, then realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you in the hereafter. And Umar radhiyallahu anhu once saw a man in the market, and this man was walking around. He'd go to every store, he'd see something, he'd like it and he'd buy it, and he went to another one, he saw something, he liked it and he bought it. And he was doing this, and Umar saw him and called him and said, what are you doing? He said, I saw it, I liked it, and so I bought it. And Umar said, do you buy everything that you like? You're out of control, just impulse buying. And many of us, we have that. Sometimes we see something, without thinking, we just go ahead and buy it. And so here Umar radhiyallahu anhu is telling him, don't buy everything you like, control yourself. That even if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you to buy it, then have some control over your spending. And many of us, I find that actually we get into debt, and the next part we'll talk about, because of uncontrolled spending. Many times the people I speak to that are in debt, actually they have a lot of money. But the problem is they bought too much in too short period of a time and now they're in debt. So it's not they can't afford each item, but they can't afford all of them right now. And so we have to first of all remember that it's part of Iman, it's part of Islam to control our spending. Just as we teach our children obedience in ourselves to be at the salah in time, be in the masjid on time, make your dhikr before you go to bed, controlling your spending is part of that. Okay, and it's part of Iman, it's part of Islam, and it's part of the character of a Muslim. Some of the explanation of that, as Ibn Uthaymeen said, is that if a person is amidst those, among those of modest circumstances, who are not able to dress themselves with expensive clothing, humbling himself and dressing like them, so that he does not break their hearts or appear as haughty or superior to them, he will attain this immense reward. If, however, he is amongst people with whom Allah is blessed to wear more expensive clothing, that is not unlawful, and it is better for him to dress like them, because of the hadith, Allah is beautiful and loves beauty. And without doubt, if a person is among such people who wear beautiful clothing, and instead chooses to dress himself in a manner lower than theirs, then this is regarded as libas al-shuhra, by which one seeks attention. So a person looks at what the circumstances dictate. This basically means if you go to a wedding, and you have those type of clothes and people are dressed nicely, don't turn up in your shorts and t-shirts and think, I'm having zuhud. That's not zuhud, you're just doing it to stand out. It's okay, that's not part of Islam. That's not part of attaining this hadith. It's okay? So keep that in mind as well. That if you're going to a situation, people wear certain types of clothes and you can afford that, then don't think, I'm going to dress less and that makes me more pious. No. And sometimes it's the complete opposite. And the last part I wanted to talk about is actually dying with debt. So not only is avoiding interest very important, but actually debt is very important. And dying with debt, the Prophet said that we were sitting with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he raised his head towards the sky. Then he put his palm on his forehead and said, Subhanallah, what a strict issue that has been revealed to me. We remained silent and were afraid. The following morning I asked him, O Messenger of Allah, what is the strict issue that has been revealed? He said, by the one in whose hand is my soul. If a man were killed in battle for the sake of Allah, then brought back to life, then killed and brought back to life again, then killed, and he owed a debt, he would not enter paradise until his debt was paid off. So it's a very important lesson for us that we should, first of all, keep account of what debt we have. Make sure it's written in our will, and the Prophet said no Muslim should go 3 days without having a will, and your will should include the money that you have, the assets that you possess, debts that you have, and also any religious debts that you have, like you didn't perform Hajj, you have certain fasts missing, and so on. You should include them as well. So here the Prophet is told that even if a man goes in jihad and he dies as shaheed, he will not enter paradise until his debt is paid. And actually some of the Sahaba who died in the Battle of Uhud, they appeared to other companions the next day in their dream, and they said to him, go to such and such place, I left my shield there, take my shield and sell it and pay off my debt, for I am not allowed to enter paradise until my debt is paid. And these are Sahaba who died fighting for the Prophet ﷺ in his lifetime, and they were prevented from paradise. So us who have student debts, perhaps we borrowed money from relatives and other people, make sure it's written down, and also make sure it's manageable. So at least the assets you have, they can be sold and pay off your debt. It's said that Zubayr ibn Awam, when he passed away, he had a debt of 500,000 dirham. 500,000 dirham, which today's money is worth about £5 million. He was in debt. And his son Abdullah, he sold off his land, and for the next 5 years at Hajj, he would call out to anyone, saying, is there anyone who my father owes money, and I will pay him. And he paid off all of that, and the land that his father had and houses actually left him with a huge inheritance, tens of millions of pounds worth of inheritance. So although he had debt, he had collateral that he can pay that debt with. So it should be manageable. And finally, the Prophet refrained from offering a funeral salah for the one who had died owing 2 dinars, until Abu Qatada promised to pay it off for him. And when he saw him the following day and said, I have paid it off, the Prophet said, now his skin has become cool for him. The Prophet refused to pay. Abu Qatada said, I will pay it. Then the Prophet prayed the salah. When he paid it, that said, now his skin has become cool. I was burning due to that debt. So it's very serious. There's punishment in the grave and the hereafter for the one who owes debt. That's financial debt. So always keep that in mind. Some more narrations. And other parts of Umar said, beware of debt, for it starts with worry and it ends with war. It starts with people being worried about their financial situation. It ends with war, people fighting over money. And it happens all the time. So be very careful of your debt. I'll stop there. Inshallah, have a 10-minute break. Then inshallah we'll... Is the first part to actually living without having to take interest. Living without interest basically means living without having to borrow from someone that you have to pay interest on the borrowing. Is that okay? So when I'm talking about living without interest, I'm talking about living without having to borrow from someone on which you have to pay interest. Is that okay? So how do we get to that situation? Babe, how do we get to that? The first part is that we have to prepare for problems. Okay? The first thing you have to look at when you look at your finances, you have to prepare for problems to occur. You have to foresee that some of these things are going to happen. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us about these in the Quran, so therefore we know that these will occur to us. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah. We shall certainly test you with fear and hunger, a loss of property, lives and crops. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test everyone, not just the non-Muslim, the Muslim as well. And not just the community and the government, but us as individuals. How will He test us? He will test us with fear. There'll be civil wars. There'll be people being attacked. There'll be Islamophobia. These things will occur. And so we'll be afraid, and therefore people will be afraid to go to work. People will be afraid to buy and sell. People will be afraid to go out of their houses perhaps. And so there will be fear. And that fear is a test. So how do we prepare for that situation? There will also be hunger. There will be famine. Look at Yemen today. There are 20 million people on the brink of starvation. In Syria and other parts of the world as well. They are Muslims like us. They are tested with fear. Who thought, 10 years ago that Yemen would go through this crisis? It came out of the blue. And here it is, a waking reality for 28 million people. So you have to prepare for that. He will test us with lives. That people will be born and people will pass away. The Prophet said, do not be afraid that Allah blesses you with a child. Before people used to be afraid, I don't want to have a child, don't want to have a child. If I have a child, I'll get into debt and this and this. And so they would do all sorts of measures not to have children. And sometimes if the woman became pregnant, they had to have an abortion because they were afraid of the financial side. They would abort not for any other reason other than the financial side. And that's being blessed with a child. On the other hand, the father will pass away. The breadwinner will become ill. I was in Morocco a few years ago, and it changed my perspective on a very important part. I was in Fez. I was staying at the hotel, and opposite the train station there's a long road that leads up to a masjid at the top, and along the way there's restaurants. So I stayed at the Ibis. I came down evening. I thought, I'll go get some food. It's about 10 o'clock. So I'm walking up, and as I'm walking up, you'll very commonly find in Morocco that you'll see women and children selling tissues. The tissue packets, pocket tissues. They're selling those. They buy a pack of 10. They sell them one for like 1 dirham each. They go buy a pack of 10 for 1 dirham, sell them again. So as I'm walking up, this is about 10 at night. There's a Muslim sister in probably her 30s, 40s, not much older than that. And she had a 6-month-old baby in her lap that she'd kind of covered. It was night, it was a bit chilly. And she sat there on the floor next to a restaurant, and behind her is a hotel. And she just sat there on the floor holding a pack of tissues with her baby in her lap. So I saw her and I walked past, and I went and I ordered my food from the restaurant, and I just watched, I see what happens. And it's late night, so you have the people there, they see this all the time, they're a bit used to it. So some are walking past, some's just, knocking her shoulder, some are walking around, no one's paying attention to her. The odd person drops a few pennies, and so on. And then I thought, I'm going to speak to her on my way back. Alhamdulillah, she spoke Arabic. Because the Moroccans, they have a mixture of French and Arabic, so alhamdulillah, she spoke Arabic. So I stopped her and I said, sister, why are you sat here on the floor at this time? By now it was like nearly 11 o'clock at night. Why are you sat here on the floor? She's a young person with her baby. She said, my husband is at home, and he's disabled, he had an accident at work. He's disabled and he's with our 2 other children are with him. And I am here, trying to make some money to pay for his medication. Now, stop for a moment and think, out of all the jobs a person could do, Why would they sit on the floor and sell tissues 11 o'clock at night in the middle of Fez? Because this person doesn't have any other skills that they can use to earn money. Why don't they have any other skills they can use to earn money? Because sadly, the Muslim preachers have a culture that women shouldn't work. And you don't need to educate your daughters. And once she'll get married, she'll have a husband and so on. But this woman got married, had a husband, who had an accident, and how common is it that people have accidents? And he was disabled. And now she is the breadwinner. And so you have to plan forward. And protecting ourselves means protecting everyone. Your son, your daughter needs to have some skills they can use that should you fall ill, should you become disabled, should you not be able to earn, should you pass away, that they can pick up and earn like you're earning. How are they going to do that if they don't have skills? How are they going to do that if they don't have work experience? How are they going to do that if they don't have something on the side that they're using to earn that they can upscale? Somebody who's not worked for 20 years cannot just go into the job market and get a job and earn, the 2,000, 3,000 pound a month that you're earning. They can't do it. So you have to plan ahead. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ, that the men are stewards for the women. Everyone likes to use this ayah to say that men are stronger than women. The ayah is intended, as many of the scholars said, that actually men are responsible for their women, that they are stewards over them. So part of that stewardship is to look after her and have her goodwill in your mind. So if she isn't able to do that at all, then should something happen to you, what's going to happen? Not only will you suffer, not only will she suffer, not only will your children suffer. So think about this is a promise given to everyone. We shall certainly test you. Okay, but give good news to those who are steadfast, those who say when they're afflicted with a calamity, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Indeed, we belong to Allah, and to Him shall we return. And this actually is not just a passive thing, that the husband dies, she'll just sit there for the rest of her life saying Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, and gold's going to come from the heaven. No, this is like a nasheed. You pump yourself up with it. When you're down and you're feeling this difficulty, you keep telling yourself Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Keep working and know that whatever Allah took from you belongs to Him. But keep working. Okay, so you have to plan for problems to occur. Okay? Now with that in mind, there are 5 simple steps that I'm going to share with you to practically avoid the need for riba. Is that okay? And this is something I want everybody to do. Okay, so when you go home, ideally, normally when last time I did this as part of my class, I had my students bring in their bank statements for the last 3 months. And they went through their own bank statements. Remember, Nabil, we did it on the board. Okay. So the first part is you have to budget your expenses. Who can honestly say in this room that they've ever budgeted their expenses? Alhamdulillah. Was that when you wanted to buy something? Or you do it regularly? Yeah.
No, yeah, I do it regularly all the time.
Okay, so you know how much you've got to spend on something and you only spend from that amount?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Now everyone who doesn't, you need to learn as well. Now, the first part is, that I want everyone to do, is you need to list all of your monthly outgoings. And by analysis of your past 3 months of bank statements. So I want you to do is to list all of your actual outgoings. And you can find online, there's many ones. This is one from a group called the Financial Peace University. You might have heard of Dave Ramsey. He does things like this. And he just has different section headings. And you list down how much you're actually spending. Is it okay? How much you're actually spending. And when I've done this with my other classes, and we are going to do it today, you'll find that there are some sections on there that you're spending like ridiculous amount. Now, I was once with a brother, and Hamza has a very good income and job. Earns like £4,000 or £5,000 a month. And he was saying to me that I don't have any money at the end of the month. I said to him, what's going on? What's the problem? He said, I don't know. I can't work it out. I said, well, alhamdulillah, you just finished your extension. I'd gone to see it after you'd done his extension. I said, alhamdulillah, you just bought a new TV and we're watching BT Sport. And he said, I just did the kitchen as well. And he's got a new fridge and freezer. I said, all you've done is that you've bought all these things at once after a huge amount of money's gone out. And you're falling behind because you've got so many installments. You've got like nearly £4,000 worth of instalments, and you just decided to buy a new car on top. And this is the wrong time to do it. You have enough money to buy all these things, but not right now. So you have to budget so you know where you are. Okay, and don't think it's being stingy, it's about being disciplined. Like we said in the previous part, holding yourself back from spending on things is part of discipline. And when I did this with somebody else, we worked out that if you just had, you just bought a new TV, like a 4K, 65-inch TV or 55-inch TV, and you've got Sky Sports, you've got BT Sports, and you've got Netflix, you've got Spotify, and you've got Amazon Prime, then over a year, just on those things, you're spending about £2,500 a year. And it's easy because a good deal on Sky Pack is about £89. Amazon is about £6 a month. Netflix is about £8 a month. And they sound small. And your gym membership is about £20 a month or something. But when you add them together, very quickly you have a huge amount that's just on your entertainment. And so you have to look at that and say, actually, is that the right place to be spending it? That's why I said to many of my class that you can go on Umrah every year. Every year you and your whole family can go on Umrah, just get rid of the TV. And I'm not saying you to do it because of the content on the TV, I'm just telling you to do it because of the finances. So first of all, you have to budget all of your expenses. And this practical step will let you clearly see where your money is going. And the part of this is, so you can see in front of you in black and white. It doesn't matter if you're earning cash or it comes into your bank, I don't care how you earn. But list it all out so you can see in black and white, worked out by yourself, how much you're spending each month. Not how much you want to spend, how much you're spending each month on each different category. We're going to do this as a practical exercise. And the hadith I said about controlling expenses is that living expenses are the most recurring, and reducing them can have the largest impact on our regular financial health. In the last statistics I looked at, over 70% of people in the UK have less than £1,000 in their bank account. 70% of people who live in the UK have less than £1,000 in their bank account, which basically tells us that 70% of people who live, that includes us, are living from wage to wage. They've got their wage now, they spend from it, they'll get their next wage, they'll spend from it. But if a wage stops or something happens, then they have nothing to fall back on. And so you have to reduce that from the start. Okay? If there's something that you want to buy, try to buy it without installments, because those installments chip away at your wage every single month and leave you less and less to spend. So you have to be a bit ruthless with this. And the most common expenses today are services like this, subscription services, going out eating, things like that, entertainment. Very easy to do. Very simple to think it's okay. For your finances, it can have a huge problem. So that's the first part that we have to do. The second part of that, as I mentioned before, is learn when to buy. So your wage minus expenses should tell you what you have left over for A, saving, B, investment, and C, spending. So spending actually comes third. So as you look at your expenses, take your basic expenses, that's your accommodation, whether a mortgage or renting, it's your council tax, it's your utilities bills, it's your any insurances that you have to pay for. Take all of those as your basic, and then your groceries and your eating out, takeaway, fuel expenses, car insurance, and so on. Put all of that you need to live your life, and then on top of that, you have to save some money. You then have to invest some money, and see you can spend some money. But what you can spend comes after taking out what you want to save and what you need to invest. And we're going to get to those parts later. Okay? The second part is only buy something over £1,000 on instalments when the amount left for spending is more than the instalment. So what this means is, as a principle for yourself, if something costs less than £1,000, don't buy it on instalments, because that will chip away at your monthly wage. Save up and pay for it in one go. If anything costs less than £1,000, you should not be paying for it on instalments. So, okay, that includes, most commonly these days, road tax, includes car insurance, because you know these are going to happen. They happen the same time every single year. There's no need for it to go on installment. If you need a fridge or a freezer, You want to buy anything that costs less than £1,000 as a basic. This is a basic threshold. You can move it up if you want.
So,
But don't put it on installments. This is practical advice, not religious advice. This is practical advice.
you know, for insurance,
Yeah,
so if you pay in one go,
yeah,
say it's £500,
yeah,
but if you pay over installments, they increase the,
yeah,
so it's £600, £600
Yeah.
it might be.
yeah.
Is that considered as interest or?
Very good, very good. A few years ago, if I remember now, probably about 3-4 years ago, it used to be the case that the company would say to you that if you pay us £400 now, then there's £400. But if you want to delay it, we have an admin fee, and we'll charge you an extra £100 for that admin fee. That used to be okay. There's no problem with that. Is that okay? What's happened is I've seen in the last 2 or 3 years, is that now the companies don't want their money later. So they make you take out a finance agreement with someone like Premier Finance or someone like that. And so you're actually paying an interest rate. So Premier Finance pays them up front, and you have a loan agreement with someone like them. And it's actually an interest base. So now you should actually not be doing that because it's part of Riba. That is part of an interest. Okay? So fair enough, you have to get car insurance, that's fine. You own a house, you need building insurance, that's fine. Okay, for those insurances that are legally required, we can say it's umum al-balwa, we can write that off. Is that okay? But there's no need to do it in a haram way. Is that okay? So if you can pay your insurance without interest, then you should do that.
I think a lot of people still think that delayed payment is allowed.
It's fine if it's with the company.
But not knowing that
Yeah.
it's now that what you
Yeah.
mentioned it, that it's, it's been
You have to check your deal.
It's been financed by
Yeah.
interest. So
Yeah.
people are probably not aware.
No, you have to check that.
The company does it, the installment, but they put the interest on it.
No,
Not the admin fee. I saw the interest on it when I did mine last time.
Yeah, no,
That's why
that's
I put
6
it on
months.
the one go normally.
Yeah, the big companies like Aviva and so on, they have enough finance departments to finance it, and so they charge an interest rate. The smaller car insurance companies, they get an outside financer to pay it. But it's the same thing. If you're paying an interest rate, then that's interest. Doesn't matter if it's the same company.
It's the same thing with the overdrafts as well.
Yeah, so except for students who have 0% interest, everyone else who's overdraft is interest based.
Students don't have a 0% interest.
They used to.
They don't anymore.
Really?
Most students only on 0% interest now.
We'll come to 0%. Oh, you were asking before, weren't you? About buying with 0% interest.
Yes.
So remember the hadith I mentioned at the start about riba? That the one who buys, the one who consumes, the one who gives, the one who witnesses, the one who writes down, that they are all included. So the scholars have two positions on this. The first scholar said that actually the whole contract is haram. It doesn't matter that you're just paying interest. The haram is not just receiving, the haram is also paying. It's haram to pay interest. Okay, many people think that, oh, I'm not paying it, it's okay. No. You are included in the hadith because you are part of the transaction taking place. So even that we should be avoiding. Is that okay? So paying interest is just as bad as taking it. Is that okay? So, now, if you're buying something and the person says, I will sell you this on a 0% interest for 12 months, is that now allowed? Some scholars said, well, the hadith is very clear, that the contract itself is haram. So the contract with which I'm buying this, itself is haram.
Why?
Because I'm agreeing to pay interest should I fall behind. So if I take less than 12 months, if I take more than 12 months to pay it, then I've agreed to pay interest.
If you know, you don't pay that off.
Good. The other group of scholars said no. If you are certain that you can pay this off, then you're allowed to buy it.
Worrying a lot of people here.
Good. How would you know you're certain? How do you know you're certain?
You budget. You make
Good.
sure you pay
This
it.
budget that we said tells you at the end of the month how much money do you have left. Is that okay? So I said, if you want to buy something that costs over £1,000 or whatever your threshold is, if you earn more, it should be higher. If you earn less, it should be at least £1,000. What's left at the end of the month? So say, for example, you take your expenses, we're going to do it, and at the end of the month you have £300 left. Okay? And the instalment on this over 12 months before the interest kicks in is £100. Can I buy that? if after I've put my investment and my saving aside, can I buy this? Will I fall behind on a £100 payment if I have £300 surplus a month?
No.
You shouldn't. Okay, but I have to be disciplined. Now here's the problem. What happens is I buy this on £100 a month, and I think, oh, that's fine. Then I go and I buy a new car on £200 a month, or £150 a month, which is just 3 years interest, whatever. And I think, do you know what? I'm paying this, I'm paying that, I'll be okay. Right? So I've got £50 left, and everything's okay. Is everyone happy with that? So I can pay that, no problem. I can add my car, it's okay. What happens is I fall ill, I lose my job, and I can't pay this, and I can't pay that. When you have a very tight margin, and many people I see run into a very, very tight margin, or they'll go even one better. They say, oh, I've got £50 extra, I'll throw in a kitchen that I'll pay over 2 years interest free. And that's, £50 a month. So what happens is, if anything happens, a birthday, whatever, I need to pay some money to someone, we decide now to go on holiday, or anything else happens to someone else I have to pay money out on, suddenly, I'm behind on my 12-month here, I'm behind on my 24-month on this one, and suddenly all of it is going to turn into an interest payment. And that's what happens with most of the people that I speak to. So everyone thinks that I'm okay, but the problem is they don't control their spending. So if you know that you have more than enough to pay this on a regular, and you've still got some saving, then those scholars said that you can take it out. Right? But if you don't have enough, personally, if you have enough saved to buy this in one go, then why are you taking an interest deal anyway?
Same like a house mortgage, that's we living.
But that's different. We're talking about 0% purchase. 0% purchase aren't going to be given on the house. You'll get a 0% purchase on the DFS sofa. You'll get 0% purchase on the fridge. You'll get 0% purchase on small white goods and things like that. You will not get 0% purchase on a car. Yeah, there's only one person who does it, but you have a very inflated price.
There's a leasing and there is a leasing and leasing.
We can talk about leasing, so that's like renting.
Renting,
Yeah, there's no problem with leasing.
Leasing is
I think
and contract hire is different.
Yeah, it depends on the contract. I don't want to get into individual products because each lease deal is different.
A lease deal is always APR related, which is interest rate. Contract hire does not have an APR, they just do it. It's just a straightforward payment. That is the difference.
No, a PCP deal has an interest rate attached to it. A lease deal doesn't always have an interest
A
rate.
lease deal, a PCP deal, any other deal always have a variable interest rate attached to it. The only thing that doesn't specify an interest rate is a contract hire. There's a difference.
So like I said, you have to look at the lease deal because I've seen lease deals that don't have interest rates attached to them.
How do
It's just a rent, really. I saw the lease.
But it depends on your deal.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't like talking about products because each product is different.
every product's
What
different.
I'm saying to you is it allowed in principle to take a 0% purchase or not? Some scholars said that is not allowed. And in Islamic, strictly speaking, that is a correct opinion, that is not allowed. Because the contract itself is impermissible.
Isn't that the same with credit cards?
Exactly.
Because
Yeah, same thing with credit cards.
Then in that case, every contract that is payable later in principle is haram.
No, because that's what Allah said in the Quran, that those who disbelieve say that trading is like interest. You can't trade without interest. And the believers said, Allah said that no, Allah has allowed trade and has prohibited interest. So not every deal where you buy from someone includes interest.
In UK, I think so.
No, there's many that don't. But you have to find them. There's people that do it without an interest payment. But you just have to find it.
That's the thing that imagine said, I've got a MasterCard,
Yeah.
I always pay out.
Yeah.
Pay it off before the interest.
Yeah.
So,
But what I'm saying to you is, why do you need a MasterCard?
well,
it gives you 60 days, and then you know you're going to
Get
get paid,
vouchers and all
and then you'll have the money then, and then you'll pay.
Okay, but what happens if you don't?
That's the
What I'm
risk.
saying to you is, why are you taking out credit cards?
It's a risk. It's
Understand? I have people come to me, say, oh, I take out an Amex card because I get flight points. So So dealing in riba and going to war with Allah is nicer. You're okay with that, but you'd like to take a trip to Malaysia for free.
Well, you never pay an interest, you see.
We do, but the contract itself is haram.
So the contract where you say if you don't pay something at the end of a particular time, and interest is going to be chargeable, is basically haram.
Of course it is.
And therefore all credit agreements,
Not all credit cards. Yeah, all bank credit cards like that. The conventional ones are haram, yeah. Of course. Yeah.
whether you pay
Same.
before the end of the time or not.
MasterCard, John Lewis card.
But is that the same as?
That's different. Purchase card is a different thing.
No, John Lewis is not a purchase card. Theirs is a partnership credit card.
Purchase card is a different because you have
Yeah, you have an account with the
all the
company.
lump sum, you own
Yeah, you have an account with the company, like a tab, like he said at the bar. You have a tab, and you pay it off later. That's a credit, but it's permissible because he's not charging you interest on it. You understand? So not every credit
Just going back
agreement
to
is
the-
interest.
Just going back to the credit cards, is that the same with the two opinions where if you pay, where the two scholars have the same opinion? Sorry, different
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah, same. But what I'm saying is, those who are even allowing it are anticipating that you're in control of your finances.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you understand? And what everyone sees is that someone says, okay, let's get the boys out, let's go on a holiday, let's get this car, let's buy that,
I mean,
and they lose themselves.
I'll give you an example. I'll give you my example
Yeah.
for everybody. I mean, I've had a credit card for 20 odd years.
Yeah,
And I was a bit foolish right at the beginning when I
Yeah.
took some cash out and I couldn't give it back.
Yeah.
Therefore, and that was the only time in the 20 years I've had a credit card where I've
Yeah.
incurred interest. But since then, I've been disciplined where whenever I use my credit card, I pay it at the end of the month. So
Yeah.
I know myself and my own, and I budget in a way where
but
I
let
know.
me just ask you very simply, without being too personal to anyone here, but if you're buying, what is it that you use a credit card for? If you're losing a credit card for a purchase that's less than £1,000, then why do you need it?
It could be emergency purchases towards the end of the month or whatever. it
Okay,
might be.
but we're going to come to that.
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't need a credit card for emergency purchases. If anything is less than £1,000, practically speaking, it doesn't matter whether you're a minimum wage earner or a high income earner, you should not need a credit card to pay for something less than £1,000. The only reason we get into that is because we're not managing the other sides of our finance. So we're okay with our monthly income outgo pay like that, but we're not actually managing anything for the future in terms of saving. So what we want to do is move away from credit cards and move on to savings. You know, paying for things in cash.
Principally, it's okay to use debit cards
No, you mean that like bank cards?
then. Debit cards.
Yeah, they're fine because it's your own money, isn't it? Yeah, yes, your money. You're spending it. Dave, everyone's getting nervous now. Aren't you? You should be getting nervous, which is good because it makes you check. It makes you think. Dave, no, the point is remember to plan ahead and not get stuck by missing an installment that will fall due later on. Buying on installments or by a loan is borrowing from your future self. Like he showed in the video, if I take out £1,000 from a credit card, sometime in the future I have to pay back that £1,000. So, okay, so you're borrowing from your future self. So even when you're doing it, in what we're talking about, trying to avoid riba, if you have to do it, for example, you're buying a car, and you want a semi-reliable car, it's going to cost a few £1,000s. You don't have that immediately, but that's the price of cars. So you buy it in a way, whether you can use credit cards or 0% or whatever, even if you buy it in the most efficient way, but you're going to pay for that in the future. So you make sure that the surplus you have left each month is far more than that payment. So you know you can cover it. Okay? And you're going to be saving and putting aside. So if that balloon payment comes in the end, you can cover it off if you need to. Is that okay? So it's about planning ahead. They're being proactive. Now this is the budget part. I'm not going to go too much into this, but I'll share this with you all later. What you have to do is go down each of the lines. So first your accommodation, utilities, food, clothing, everything, and put down in the last 3 months how much you spent on it. So go through, for example, say clothing. This month you spent £50. Last month you spent 100. Oh, no, this month with Boxing Day spent a lot more. But this day you spent a lot. Last month you spent a little bit. The month before you spent half of that. Average it out so you can see on average how much do I need to save to spend on clothing each month. With your food, divide that into 3. So one is your groceries for your house. One is what you spend at lunch at work or whatever you are. And the third is just takeaway and stuff like that. Takeaway restaurants when you go out. How much are you spending on those? So you can see in front of you, am I spending loads on takeaway, where I could bring it down and spend a little bit more on groceries and actually cook at home? Okay, so if you're needing to manage your finances, then that's a place to cut back on. Okay? Same like transportation, your car, things like that, insurance. Entertainment's the big one. Medical is not as serious for people in the UK because we have the NHS that comes out of national insurance. But for other places it is needed, and also it doesn't cover everyone's medical. So if you have ongoing medical costs, then you actually need to plan for those as well. Okay. And the other side is your income. Most people actually only just have one income, and that's their regular 9-to-5 job, and they have no other income. But in the next part, I'm going to be talking about when you see that your outgoing is much more than your incoming, then how can you sort that out? And actually, how can you get past more than that? So now you can start saving and actually investing for your future. Okay, the second part is to pay off your debt. And this links directly into what I said before about not buying things on installments. Okay? So if anything costs less than £1,000, don't buy it in an installment, because all you're doing is adding to your monthly debt. What you want to do is to pay off your debt as quickly as possible. Because what that means is all that money that's going out every month into debt can now be going into an investment. And if you keep putting into investment over time and just let it grow and grow, you'll build far more than just paying off debt. Okay, so the ideal situation is that you have no debt and everything you're doing is either in your savings or in your investment. Okay, and when you're investing money, that is also being productive. It's earning an amount for you every month, every year, and so on. And so it's bringing you income. Okay, so it's working away for you. Some other person's got a company or whatever it is you're investing in, and they are working, and that's adding to your own productivity. Because you can't work 2 jobs, or you can't work 5 jobs. Okay, so you allow that money that you invest to bring you another income. Okay, but it starts by paying off your debt. How do you pay it off? You start by paying off the smallest debt first. Okay, there's more complex ways of interest rates and so on, but this is about behavior. Okay, if you can focus that I have to get out of debt, then look at what is your smallest debt and put everything else on minimal payments, and all of the money you earn will now go on paying off that debt. Okay, you have to get out of debt as quickly as possible. As Prophet said, that when the person passes away, they are held back from paradise because of their debt. Doesn't matter how righteous you are, if you had debt, you are held back by it.
But you got the insurance. If you die, then the insurance they pay you.
And who said the insurance is halal to start with? So you're
That's
covering
what
yourself by
my
another
question
haram product.
Is the insurance is allowed?
Yeah, but insurance is there because of fear. So you're paying this person a premium for fear. You're afraid something's going to happen, so you're giving him money to cover you. So yes, we need it for car insurance. Yes, you need it for building insurance if you've got a mortgage. But do you need it for life insurance? Do you need it for content insurance? Do you need it for X, Y, and Z? That's all optional. You know, you have footballers insure their feet. Some people insure their tongue and things like that. Do you need these insurances or not? Or is it just playing on your fear? You know, one person said to me that, why are we so harsh on thieves when you can just take content insurance? I say, if you look at it, content insurance is a punishment. You are being punished for the thievery of other people. So we'll just stop for the adhan and then hopefully finish just before. Just before Isha. So first of all is start by paying off the smallest debt first, and reducing the overall sum of monthly payments will mean you have more money to add to pay off other debts sooner. So what you do is focus your money on paying off your debt. Pay your smallest debt, then the money you're paying to that, add on to paying your next debt, pay that off, add that on to paying the next debt, get rid of that. So you basically, what aim is to be debt free as quickly as possible. And that will mean you have money for savings, money for investment, money for retirement, and so on. Okay. When the Prophet said, whoever takes people's wealth intending to pay it back, Allah will enable him to pay it back. So if you have the niyyah that you're going to pay these people back, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you in paying them back. You'll have less other expenses come up, you have less things that are taking that money away to something else, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you pay off that debt. The next thing is to apportion your income. This is part of the second part. and for a dignified retirement, you will need to apportion your income. And one method to consider is that 75% of your income goes towards your expenses. 15%, it means expenses and spending and so on that you can use. 15% goes towards saving, and 10% goes towards investment, as a rough method. And for most people to retire and to live in the way you do now, you will need at least 15% of your annual income each year going in towards retirement. Even if your retirement's 5 years, 10 years, to have the same sort of life standard you have now. And as your home repayments finish, more wealth can be put into savings and investment. The next part is actually to work hard. You can't just do this by being lazy. You have to work extra. And one method that I use for this is that 70% of your total income should come from your 9-to-5 job. So your daily job should cover just 70% of your income to 80%. The next thing you should do is have a flexible second job. That this is your permanent job where you have to be all the time. Have a second job that you can increase and decrease as you need. And that should represent between 10 and 20% of your total income. And that is basically what will go into your savings. And the last job is that something you do ad hoc. Maybe this month, this week, odd weekend or evening is where you pick that job up. And that will account for about 10% of your income. 5 to 10% of your income will come from that job. It's not regular, but it's something you do every now and then. Okay? And remember, there's only two ways of increasing your productivity. The first is that you have to work more hours, and the second is to increase your knowledge and skills so you can be paid more for the work you do right now. So there's only two ways to increase it. Either you have to work more hours, or invest in your knowledge and skill so you can earn more from the time that you're working. Okay. And in terms of flexible jobs, there's many jobs, but things like Deliveroo, Amazon Flex, Cumin, tutoring, Uber, things like that, these are jobs that you can add on to any regular job that you're doing. And if that's your regular job, then you can seek another type of income if you want. That's more flexible for you. So this is all dependent on the type of job that you're already doing. But pick up a second flexible job. In terms of ad hoc jobs, there might be web design, photography, henna, hand painting, something related to weddings and other things that is on and off. But every person, man or woman, should have this type of work. So it adds to your overall family income. And this basically goes towards your investment or your retirement. There's something you're doing now when you're fit and healthy to work towards that time. The third part is to have a £1,000 emergency fund. So this is £1,000 set aside for emergency. Like the brother said, sometimes you have emergency, you use a credit card. No, you don't need the credit card. Most emergencies will cost less than £1,000. Car breaking down, £100 to £300. Somebody falling ill, a few £100. Suddenly have to go abroad, about £1,000. But most emergencies will cost less than £1,000. So if you have that money, you don't need to borrow at interest. You don't need to use a credit card. You don't need a flexi loan or an overdraft, because you have this money to use immediately. And it's not something you use just to pay for the takeaway and going out abroad or something like that. It's a real emergency. Okay, so make sure, if you haven't got that now, set it in. So you have £1,000 sat there. It can be in a drawer, it can be in a bank, wherever you want it, but you should be able to access it immediately. So within an hour, you should be able to get that money. Okay. And most borrowing is for problems that often occur regularly, like a car breaking down. So you should know that that is something that can occur and is likely to occur, so it shouldn't be a shock. And if you have this money, you're not worried where you're going to borrow from. The fourth is to have savings for 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. So when you did your budget and you worked out your expenses, that will tell you your target. What's my target? My immediate target after my £1,000 emergency fund is 3 months of expenses. So if I lose my job or I change job, I have 3 months of expenses. We don't need a credit card. We don't need to borrow from the bank. We don't need any other credit. We have money that we can use to pay for all of your expenses. So when you do your budget, that tells you your target. And the idea is to have at least 6 months. So for 6 months, you can live off, you've got enough savings, and what you do with this is, it's something you can access within 30 days. So you put it into some sort of investment, so it's growing for you as you're earning. But if you need it, within 30 days or in a few days you can get access to it. So emergency fund within the hour, savings 3 to 6 months expenses within 30 days. You can get it out. Is that okay? There. The fifth part is actually investment. So regular investing will help you earn more than your own productivity. And you can find an investment that will give you about usually between 6 to 10% annual return over 5 years. Now the important thing when you're investing, for people who don't know about investing, is that it's not about buying and selling tomorrow like you see in the stock market. No, investing for regular people is over 5 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. So don't look at something that will turn around quickly, because that's risky. You can lose a lot of money. But look for something that's minimum 3 to 5 years, and other investments should be about 10 years. So you give it some time to grow. And if you look at the investment over that period of time, and you just leave it, £10,000 can easily turn into £100,000 over 10 years. And these are some basic ones. And just a disclaimer, it's not an endorsement of these systems, but Yielders, Wahid, Invest, and so on. There's many that are coming up now in the halal investment market, and they're doing very well. And these are things you can look into. If you don't know a brother who's got a takeaway that you want to invest in, or someone who's got a business you want to invest in, the idea best is to invest locally. And in the only thing I'd say is know what you're investing in. Don't invest in something you don't understand. If you don't understand how the business works, don't invest in it. You have to know how the business works, how they make money, where their customers are, and then invest in it. Don't be silly and say, I need to invest, I'll give it to someone to invest. No, you need to understand where your money is going. Okay? So these are the 5 simple steps. So first is your budget, very, very important, and it sets the basis for everything else. Second is to pay off your debt, so you can put more into your savings and investment. The third is to have £1,000 emergency fund, that you need that this month. If you haven't got it now, this month, by the end of this month, get a second job, get a third job, but you need to have that aside. So you don't need an overdraft. You don't need a credit card for your daily life. And then 3 to 6 months of expenses. That means you don't even generally need a loan. If you wanted to buy a car, 3 to 6 months of expenses will easily cover that. If something emergency comes up, it'll easily cover that. And the last part is your investment. Now, just as we finish, I wanted to do a bit of reminder, just for myself and yourself, that this part of our wealth is part of the rizq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, anyone who believes in Allah and the last day should heed this. God will find a way out for those who are mindful of Him and provide them from an unexpected source. This means that we're working hard, this means that we're sincere, and we're thinking. We're planning for our future. And when something happens like this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide for us. But that doesn't mean that we don't do our effort, we don't do our planning. Okay? And the other last part that everyone likes to know, any du'as that we can make. And this is one of the du'as of the Prophet he used to say, and you can remember it, Allahumma inni as'aluka rizqan tayyiban wa amalan nafi'an wa ilman nafi'an wa amalan mutaqabbalan. Oh Allah, I ask you for good provision, beneficial knowledge, and accepted good deeds. So these are some of the du'as that you can make. Another one is Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-kufri wal-faqri wa adhab al-qabr. Oh Allah, I seek refuge of you from disbelief, from poverty, and the torment of the grave. And the Prophet used to say this after every salah. So these are some of the du'as that we can say. And the last one, if a person's in heavy debt, then this is the du'a that you can make. That's what we ask Allah. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ma'thami wal-maghrib. Oh Allah, I seek refuge with you from sin and heavy debt. And someone asked him, how often do you seek refuge from heavy debt? He said, a man gets into debt, he speaks and tells lies, and he makes a promise and breaks it. This is why we seek refuge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from this. It's a very serious thing. It's serious for our spirituality. It's serious for our hereafter. And this is all part of entering Jannah. Don't think this is separate from praying in the musalla, praying in the masjid. Your wealth and how you deal with it, how you spend it, how you earn it, and how you look after yourselves and your family is all to do with entering paradise. This is not separate from the dhikr, it's not separate from the salah. Avoiding riba is a serious thing. So don't take it lightly that you have a credit card or you use this. That's not what you should be doing. Okay? You should be avoiding that. If you're having to use that, then realize there's a problem. If you're having to borrow from the bank, then realize there's a problem. And the brother asked very briefly just about mortgages and so on, student loans. If there's something that a person needs, and there is a dollar, there's a harm in that not being present. Like for example, our children go to schools in certain areas. We have to live in those areas during the time they're going to schools. The rental market is unstable. There's a lot of practical instability in renting as well. And therefore, if you feel that I need to buy a house, then it's permissible for you to buy a house that you're going to live in. Is that okay? And if you need 3 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms or 5 bedrooms, that's to do with your family. Is that okay? But it's permissible then for you to buy the house that you're going to live in. But realize it's all to do with your financial state. So it's not allowed then for you to buy a house that you can't afford. And say, oh, the Imam said it's permissible. No. You look at your expenses, you budget, you plan, and then you buy a house that's in line with what you can afford. Okay? If you're being allowed to do something that's questionable, don't commit a sin in the process and get yourself into more debt. So take advice, think about it, and then go to it. In terms of student loans, for most people, if they can't study without taking out a student loan, then it's permissible for them to do that. Because this is to do avoiding harm. If they are a person who feels that they want higher education, then there's no problem in that. They don't need a fatwa for themselves. If they can find another source to pay for it, then that's good. But if they can't, and it's difficult for them, or not possible, then taking a student loan is fine. Again, I do have come across practical cases of brothers and sisters who haven't gone to uni because they felt that the loan was harm, and therefore they suffer in the long term. But some people, they don't want to go to uni, it's not beneficial for them. So it's not something like a lifestyle everyone has to do. So you decide for yourself if it's useful, you can go ahead with it.